On April 30th, 1943, a body washed ashore on the Spanish coast near Huelva. A Spanish fisherman discovered the corpse floating in the surf. The man wore the uniform of a British Royal Marines officer. A leather briefcase was chained to his wrist. Local authorities notified the Spanish government. Spain was officially neutral but sympathetic to Germany. Spanish officials examined the body and the briefcase. Inside were top-secret documents about Allied invasion plans. The documents revealed that the Allies would invade Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily, as German intelligence had suspected. The papers appeared authentic. Official letterhead, proper seals, genuine signatures. They detailed troop movements, landing beaches, and operational timelines. Spanish intelligence photographed the documents. They passed copies to German agents in Madrid. The Germans forwarded them to Berlin. Adolf Hitler himself reviewed the intelligence. The documents seemed conclusive. The Allies were planning invasions of Greece and Sardinia. Sicily was a diversion, not the real target. Hitler ordered massive reinforcements to Greece and Sardinia, except the dead officer wasn't a British officer. He was a Welsh vagrant who had died from eating rat poison. The documents were forgeries created by British intelligence. The entire discovery was an elaborate deception. The real Allied target was Sicily, and Hitler had just moved his defences away from it. Operation Mincemeat, the mission that turned a corpse into the most successful spy of World War II. The deception that convinced Hitler to protect the wrong places. The plan so audacious that even Winston Churchill doubted it would work. But it worked, spectacularly. When Allied forces invaded Sicily on July 10, 1943, they found weak defences. The Germans had moved their best divisions to Greece and Sardinia. The invasion succeeded with far fewer casualties than expected, all because the Nazis believed a dead man's lies. This wasn't the only time Allied deception saved thousands of lives. An entire network of phantom armies, fake radio traffic, and invented agents convinced Germany to defend the wrong places at the wrong times. The greatest spy networks of World War II never existed. They were fiction, but the Germans never knew it. This is the story of the spies who weren't spies, the armies that weren't armies, the invasions that never happened, and how Allied intelligence convinced the most paranoid regime in history to believe complete fabrications. The story of how deception became the most powerful weapon of the war. Historical context: the intelligence war behind the war. World War II was fought on two levels simultaneously: the physical war of armies, navies, and air forces, and the shadow war of intelligence, deception, and psychological manipulation. Germany entered the war with significant intelligence advantages. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, was well established and professional. The SD, Sicherheitsdienst, provided Nazi Party intelligence. The Gestapo handled counterintelligence and security. These organizations had operated throughout the 1930s. They had recruited agents across Europe. They had established networks in neutral countries. They had broken various Allied codes and ciphers. Britain's intelligence services were in disarray in 1939. MI5, counterintelligence, and MI6, foreign intelligence, were small and underfunded. They had limited overseas networks after years of peacetime neglect. Their methods were outdated, and their technology was behind German capabilities. The government code and cipher school at Bletchley Park was just beginning to crack German Enigma codes. Special Operations Executive, SOE, didn't exist yet. It would be created in 1940. Britain had no equivalent to the Abwehr's extensive agent networks. This intelligence deficit was dangerous. Germany knew far more about British capabilities and intentions than Britain knew about Germany. This asymmetry gave Germany operational advantages in the early war years, but Britain had one critical advantage: geography. As an island nation, Britain could control who entered and left. Every German agent attempting to enter Britain had to cross water or neutral territory. This made German agent infiltration detectable. MI5 began arresting German agents shortly after war began. By early 1940, they had captured dozens of Abwehr agents attempting to operate in Britain. This presented an opportunity that would change intelligence warfare. Rather than simply imprisoning captured agents, MI5 offered them a choice: cooperate and send false information to Germany, or face execution as spies. Most chose cooperation. They became double agents, still reporting to Germany but controlled by British intelligence. The double-cross system, ex-ICSA committee, was formalized in January 1941. Its purpose: use captured German agents to feed false information to the Abwehr. The system would eventually control every German agent in Britain. This was unprecedented in intelligence history, an intelligence service completely controlling its opponent's information sources. Every report Germany received from Britain came from British-controlled agents. Germany's entire intelligence picture of Britain was fabricated, but controlling agents was only the first step. The critical challenge was making the deception believable. False information had to be carefully crafted. Too obvious, and Germany would suspect the agents were compromised. Too subtle, and Germany would ignore it. The deception had to include truthful information that Germany could verify independently. This established the agents' credibility. Once credible, they could feed false strategic information that couldn't be easily verified. The double-cross system operated on several levels, protecting Allied secrets by feeding false explanations for events Germany would detect anyway, misdirecting German military operations through false intelligence about Allied plans, tying down German resources in wrong locations by exaggerating threats, building long-term credibility for specific agents to be used in critical deceptions. One agent might spend months establishing credibility with minor, verifiable information. Then, at a critical moment, they would deliver crucial false intelligence. Germany would believe it because the agent had proven reliable previously. The system required extraordinary coordination. Every piece of false information had to be consistent across all agents. Agents couldn't contradict each other, or Germany would suspect deception. Every detail had to be carefully tracked and cross-referenced. MI5's B1A section managed this complexity. They maintained detailed records of every piece of information each agent had reported. They ensured consistency across the entire deception network. They planned deception campaigns months in advance. By 1942, the double-cross system controlled approximately 120 German agents. Not all were in Britain. Some operated from neutral countries or Allied-controlled territories, but collectively, they constituted Germany's entire intelligence network regarding Britain. Germany's blindness to this penetration was remarkable. The Abwehr continued to trust agents who had been compromised for years. They never conducted effective internal audits that might have detected inconsistencies. They never seriously questioned whether their entire British network might be controlled. This overconfidence had roots in organizational culture. The Abwehr was led by Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, who was actually anti-Nazi. Canaris subtly undermined German intelligence effectiveness while maintaining plausible deniability. He protected incompetent officers who wouldn't threaten his position. He discouraged the kind of skeptical analysis that might have detected the double cross. German intelligence also suffered from confirmation bias. They wanted to believe their agents were effective. They tended to accept reports that confirmed their preconceptions. They dismissed contradictory evidence as agent error rather than systematic deception. Allied deception exploited these weaknesses ruthlessly. Beyond the double-cross system, Allies developed other deception methods. Physical deception using dummy tanks, aircraft and landing craft. Electronic deception with false radio traffic. Diplomatic deception through false rumors planted in neutral countries. Visual deception using camouflage and disguised installations. These methods reinforced each other. A double-cross agent might report seeing troops concentrating in an area. Physical dummy equipment would be visible to German reconnaissance. Radio traffic would indicate military activity. Diplomatic channels would leak information confirming the build-up. Germany would receive the same false intelligence from multiple independent sources. This made the deception far more credible than any single source. The ultimate goal was strategic deception, making Germany defend the wrong places, making them expect attacks that never came, making them unprepared for attacks that did come. This reached its peak in 1943-1944 with preparations for D-Day, but it began with smaller operations that tested and refined deception techniques. Operation Mincemeat was one of these critical early deceptions. The idea originated with Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley and Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague. Both worked in British naval intelligence. Both understood that Germany desperately wanted intelligence about Allied invasion plans. In 1943, the Allies were planning to invade Sicily. This was obvious to Germany. Sicily was the logical next step after North Africa. The island was close to Africa, had good ports, and threatened Italy. But Germany didn't know exactly when or where the invasion would come. They had limited forces to defend multiple possible targets. They needed intelligence to allocate defences effectively. Cholmondeley and Montague proposed giving them that intelligence, false intelligence. Make Germany believe the Allies would attack Greece and Sardinia instead of Sicily. Germany would move defences away from Sicily to protect the real targets. The Sicily invasion would face weaker opposition. The challenge was creating deception credible enough to convince German intelligence. A captured agent claiming to have overheard invasion plans wouldn't be believed. Documents needed to appear accidentally obtained, not deliberately planted. The solution was brilliant and macabre. Plant false invasion plans on a corpse. Make it appear the officer carrying the plans had died in an aircraft accident. Let the body wash ashore in Spain, where German agents would access the documents. If executed properly, Germany would believe they had obtained genuine intelligence through fortunate accident. They would never suspect deliberate deception. The plan was approved despite its audacity. Now came the challenge of execution. Technical analysis. The art of creating a convincing corpse operation. Mincemeat required solving multiple technical challenges. Each had to be addressed perfectly, or the deception would fail. First challenge, obtaining a suitable corpse. The body had to appear to have died recently from drowning or aircraft accident. It couldn't show signs of disease that would be inconsistent with a healthy officer. It had to be preserved well enough to float at sea for several days without obvious decomposition. British intelligence approached Sir Bernard Spilsbury, Britain's leading forensic pathologist. Spilsbury had extensive experience with drowning cases. He could advise on what drowning victims looked like after days in the ocean. Spilsbury recommended finding someone who had died from pneumonia or similar respiratory failure. The fluid in the lungs would resemble drowning. Spanish doctors performing autopsy wouldn't necessarily distinguish between them. The search for a suitable body went through coroners' offices in London. Many bodies were rejected for various reasons: too old, too young, wrong build, visible disease, suspicious circumstances. Eventually, they obtained the body of Glyndwr Michael. Michael was a 34-year-old Welsh vagrant. He had died on January 28, 1943, from eating rat poison containing phosphorus. The death was ruled suicide, though it may have been accidental. Michael's body met the requirements. He was the right age for a military officer. His build was average and unremarkable. His death had left no obvious external injuries. The pneumonia-like effects of the poisoning could pass as drowning. The body was refrigerated immediately to slow decomposition, but it couldn't be frozen. Frozen bodies don't decompose naturally in water. Maintaining the body in proper condition until the operation was executed became a constant challenge. Second challenge, creating a convincing identity. The corpse needed complete identity documents and personal effects. Everything had to be authentic and consistent. The identity created was Major William Martin, Royal Marines. The name was common enough to seem unremarkable. Royal Marines made sense for someone travelling between military headquarters. Identity documents were created. Military identity card with photo taken of the corpse. Ration cards and identity papers. Letter from Major Martin's bank regarding an overdraft. Receipts and ticket stubs. Personal letters from a fiancée named Pam. Each item was carefully aged and worn. Documents were carried in pockets and handled repeatedly to show natural wear. The photo on the identity card was taken carefully to make the corpse appear alive. The fiancée letters were particularly important for establishing authenticity. They had to be personal enough to seem genuine, but not so private that Spanish officials wouldn't share them with Germans. They mentioned engagement ring purchases, wedding plans, and personal affection. The ring receipt showed Major Martin had purchased an engagement ring. The ring itself was placed in his pocket. These details created a tragic human story. A man who had just gotten engaged and died before his wedding. Third challenge, creating convincing documents for the briefcase. The false invasion plans had to appear absolutely authentic. They had to use proper military format, terminology, and security classifications. They had to be written by credible authors. The documents created included a personal letter from Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Harold Alexander, Commander in North Africa. A personal letter from Lord Louis Mountbatten to Admiral Andrew Cunningham. Documents regarding allocation of landing craft and assault troops. Additional correspondence discussing logistics and operational timing. The Nye letter was the centerpiece of the entire deception. It was written on proper War Office letterhead with watermarks. It included the genuine signature of General Nye, obtained through careful forgery. It discussed Allied invasion plans in seemingly casual, personal terms that senior officers might use in private correspondence. The genius of the letter was its indirection. It didn't directly state, "We are invading Greece and Sardinia." Instead, it discussed them obliquely, mentioning Sicily only as cover for the real operations. It included this carefully crafted sentence: "We have had recent information that the Boche have been reinforcing and strengthening their defences in Greece and Crete, and CIGS felt that our forces for the assault were insufficient. It was agreed to cut down the forces for Husky operation and to put all our efforts into Brimstone." Husky was the code name for the Sicily operation, real and known to Germans through captured documents and signals intelligence. Brimstone was invented. It supposedly referred to an operation against Sardinia. The mention of Husky being reduced to reinforce other operations was the key deception. The letter also included verifiable details that established credibility, discussion of real commanders and their actual positions, reference to genuine strategic considerations about Mediterranean operations, mention of the shortage of landing craft, a real Allied problem that Germans knew about, discussion of coordination with American forces, consistent with known Allied planning processes. These accurate details were crucial for selling the deception. German analysts would verify every checkable fact. If even one detail was wrong, they might suspect the entire document was fabricated. Everything had to be perfect. The Mountbatten letter served a different purpose. It explained why Major Martin was carrying such sensitive documents. Mountbatten's letter stated, "You will have heard from the War Cabinet that Dicky Mountbatten is sending you a messenger with important documents. This is the messenger, Major Martin R.M. I know he is not the usual courier, but all courier flights are completely full at present, with men going out for the coming operations." This solved several potential problems. It explained why a relatively junior officer was carrying top-secret documents. It justified the unusual travel arrangements via Gibraltar rather than direct flight. It established that Martin was doing a favor for senior commanders, not his regular job. It made any slight irregularities in Martin's documentation seem explainable. Additional documents in the briefcase included a letter from Mountbatten to General Eisenhower discussing combined operations, a pamphlet on the use of landing craft in amphibious operations, a letter discussing sardine procurement, a subtle hint at Sardinia embedded as innocent correspondence. Each document reinforced the others. The Germans would examine every scrap of paper. Everything had to tell a consistent story. Fourth challenge, creating a plausible scenario for the body's discovery. The corpse had to be released into the ocean where it would drift ashore near Huelva, Spain. The location was chosen with extreme care based on multiple factors. Huelva had an active German intelligence network known to British counterintelligence. The local German agent, Adolf Klaus, was active and well connected with Spanish authorities. Spanish officials in Huelva were known to be sympathetic to Germany and willing to share information. The British vice-consul in Huelva, Francis Hazelden, could be trusted to observe what happened to the body without interfering excessively, but more important was the oceanography. The body had to drift naturally to Huelva from a plausible aircraft crash location. British naval intelligence consulted oceanographic experts about currents, wind patterns, and drift rates. They calculated that a body released about a mile offshore from Huelva would wash ashore within a few hours to a day, depending on winds and tides. A body released further offshore would drift for days, giving time for decomposition that might reveal the deception. The timing had to be precise. The scenario created was an aircraft flying from Britain to Gibraltar that had crashed into the sea. The aircraft was supposedly a transport flight carrying Major Martin and others. The crash occurred somewhere off the Spanish coast. Martin's body washed ashore while others were lost at sea. The problem was making this scenario physically plausible. Regular aircraft from Britain to North Africa flew routes that wouldn't pass near Huelva. The normal route was far to the east over the Mediterranean. The solution was indicating the aircraft was flying specifically to Gibraltar rather than North Africa. Gibraltar was a common waypoint where passengers would transfer to other flights. This route would pass closer to Huelva, though still not directly overhead. But there was still a geographical problem. Even Gibraltar-bound flights wouldn't crash exactly where the body would need to be released for optimal drift. The solution was hoping Spanish authorities wouldn't examine ocean currents and drift patterns too carefully. They didn't. They accepted that a body from an aircraft crash could wash ashore at Huelva. A critical detail, the state of the body when discovered. It had to show appropriate decomposition for several days in the ocean. but not so much decomposition that Spanish doctors would realize it had been dead for months. Sir Bernard Spilsbury advised on what drowning victims looked like after days at sea. Skin would be pallid and slightly bloated. Fingers would be wrinkled from water exposure. There might be minor sea life activity, small fish bites or barnacle attachment. The body was carefully prepared to show these characteristics. Before release, it was examined to ensure it would pass medical inspection. The concern was that Spanish doctors might perform a detailed autopsy that would reveal inconsistencies. Fortunately, Spanish medical procedures at the time were less rigorous than British or German standards. A body recovered from the sea would typically receive a cursory examination to determine cause of death. As long as drowning seemed plausible, detailed investigation was unlikely. Fifth challenge: ensuring the briefcase and documents would be discovered and examined. The briefcase was chained to Major Martin's wrist. This was standard procedure for officers carrying classified documents. It ensured the briefcase wouldn't be lost if the officer fell or was incapacitated. But it created a risk. What if Spanish authorities simply removed the briefcase and returned it to British officials without opening it? Professional courtesy and diplomatic protocol might prevent examination of British military documents. The solution was creating circumstances where examination seemed justified. The documents were in a locked briefcase, but the key was in Martin's pocket. Spanish officials could open the briefcase while inventorying the dead officer's effects. Curiosity would compel them to examine the contents. Once opened, the documents were too sensitive to ignore. Top-secret markings and official letterheads would make clear this was valuable intelligence. Spanish officials sympathetic to Germany would photograph the documents before returning them. British intelligence knew the Spanish authorities' procedures. They knew that Admiral Moreno, head of Spanish naval intelligence in the region, was pro-German. They knew he had regular contact with German agents. They were confident the documents would reach German hands within days. What they couldn't control was whether the Germans would believe the documents once they saw them. Everything depended on the quality of the deception. Sixth challenge: monitoring the operation without revealing awareness. British intelligence needed to know if the operation succeeded, but they couldn't ask directly. That would reveal they knew about the body. Francis Hazelden, the British vice-consul in Huelva, was read into the operation. His job was to observe Spanish reactions without interfering. He would request return of Major Martin's body and effects. He would act exactly as a vice-consul would for a genuine dead British officer. But he would also report back on any unusual interest from Spanish authorities. Hazelden performed brilliantly. He formally requested the body and effects from Spanish authorities. He expressed appropriate concern and sorrow. He arranged for burial in the local cemetery. He dealt with Spanish officials exactly as protocol required. Meanwhile, he observed that Spanish authorities were taking unusual time before returning the effects. The briefcase and documents were gone for several days. When returned, they showed signs of having been opened and examined. Photographs had been taken, visible from slight misalignment of papers. Hazelden reported these observations to London. British intelligence knew the documents had been examined. Now they needed to know if the Germans believed them. Ultra-intelligence, decrypted German Enigma messages, provided the answer. Within days, German signals traffic showed increased concern about Greece and Sardinia. Messages discussed reinforcing defences in both locations. References were made to intelligence from Spain indicating Allied intentions. The operation had worked. The Germans believed the deception. But British intelligence faced a final challenge: maintaining the deception. If they seemed too unconcerned about the lost documents, Germans might suspect deception. They had to react as they would if genuine top-secret plans had been compromised. A carefully calibrated response was orchestrated. The British government formally protested to Spain about the briefcase being opened. They demanded investigation into whether Spanish neutrality had been violated. They changed some operational code names and communications procedures as if assuming Germans had the intelligence. These reactions reinforced German confidence that the documents were genuine. Why would the British protest and change procedures if the documents were deception? The technical sophistication of Operation Mincemeat was extraordinary even by modern standards. Every detail was considered and perfected. Every potential failure point was addressed. Every contingency was planned for. The operation required expertise from multiple domains: forensic pathology to prepare a convincing corpse, oceanography to calculate drift patterns, document forgery to create authentic-seeming papers, intelligence analysis to craft convincing deception, diplomatic knowledge to predict Spanish reactions, signals intelligence to monitor German responses. No single person could have planned or executed the operation alone. It required unprecedented coordination across multiple agencies and specialties. The success demonstrated that deception operations could be conducted at a strategic level. Previous deception had been primarily tactical, hiding troop movements, disguising installations. Operation Mincemeat deceived at the highest strategic level, altering major force deployments. This opened new possibilities for intelligence warfare. If a corps with false documents could redirect German divisions, what else could deception achieve? The answer would come in Operation Fortitude, the massive D-Day deception. But that operation built directly on the methods proven by Operation Mincemeat. Fifth challenge: timing the operation. The body had been refrigerated since January. It was now April. Decomposition was becoming an issue despite refrigeration. The body had to be released soon, or it would be too decomposed to be credible. But it had to be released at the right time relative to the Sicily invasion planning. Too early, and Germany would have time to investigate inconsistencies. Too late, and they wouldn't have time to redeploy forces. April 30th, 1943 was chosen. The submarine HMS Seraph was tasked with the operation. The body was placed in a special canister filled with dry ice. The canister was loaded aboard the submarine. Lieutenant Norman Jewell commanded the Seraph. Only he and a few crew members knew the mission details. The rest of the crew were told they were deploying a secret weapon. Sixth challenge: releasing the body convincingly. The body had to appear to have drifted naturally. It couldn't look like it had been deliberately placed. The submarine surfaced off the Spanish coast near Huelva before dawn. The canister was opened on deck. The body was dressed in full uniform with the briefcase chained to its wrist. A life jacket was fitted loosely, consistent with someone who had tried to survive a crash. Personal effects were checked one final time. Identity documents, letters from Pam, ticket stubs, keys, coins, cigarettes, matches, everything a person would normally carry. The body was inflated slightly with air to ensure it would float. It was placed in the water carefully. The submarine crew watched as the current carried it toward shore. A final detail: a rubber dinghy was released nearby. This suggested that Martin had attempted to reach the dinghy, but failed. It made the scenario more plausible. The submarine dove and departed. Now everything depended on whether Spanish authorities would find the body and whether Germans would believe the documents. The technical precision of Operation Mincemeat was extraordinary. Every detail had been considered. Every potential question had been anticipated. Every element reinforced the deception. This level of detail was typical of successful Allied deception operations. Nothing was left to chance. The Germans were paranoid and thorough. Only perfect deception could fool them, and perfect deception required technical mastery of every aspect. Human impact, the people behind the deception. Ewan Montagu was a 41-year-old naval intelligence officer when he helped create Operation Mincemeat. Before the war, he had been a successful barrister. He had no intelligence experience before 1939. He was recruited because he was clever, discreet, and understood how to construct convincing arguments. Montagu later wrote about the psychological weight of the operation. He had taken a dead man, someone who couldn't consent, and turned him into a spy. Glyndŵr Michael had died alone and desperate, a vagrant with no family. Now his body was being used in an elaborate deception. I sometimes wondered what Michael would have thought, Montagu wrote in his 1953 book, The Man Who Never Was. Would he have approved? Would he have felt proud that his death served a purpose? I hope so, but I'll never know. We used him without his permission because we had no choice. The letters from Pam, the fictional fiancée, bothered Montagu particularly. They were written by an MI5 secretary named John Leslie. She had poured genuine emotion into them to make them convincing. Reading them, Montagu felt he was intruding on a real relationship, except it wasn't real. Major Martin wasn't real. Pam wasn't real. But the emotions in the letters felt real. This blurring of reality and fiction was psychologically disorienting. Montagu sometimes caught himself thinking of Major Martin as if he were a real person. He would wonder if the invasion plan made sense from Martin's perspective. Then he would remember. There was no Martin, only Michael's corpse wearing Martin's identity. John Leslie, who wrote the letters, had her own difficulties with the operation. She was 23 years old, unmarried, working long hours in military intelligence. She wrote passionate love letters to a fictional man for a corpse to carry. Leslie later said, "It was strange writing love letters to no one. I imagined what I would want to write to someone I loved who was going into danger. I put real feeling into them because I knew German intelligence would analyze them. If they felt false, the whole operation would fail." She included a photo of herself to serve as Pam's picture. German intelligence would examine it, trying to assess if the relationship seemed genuine. Leslie knew her face would be studied by enemy agents, trying to determine if she was real. After the operation, Leslie kept a copy of the letters. She would reread them occasionally with mixed feelings. They represented her contribution to winning the war, but they were also intimate expressions of emotions she had fabricated. Charles Cholmondeley, who co-created the operation, was 28 years old. He was an RAF officer with a talent for creative thinking. He had proposed using a corpse for deception in an earlier memo. The memo had been filed away until the Sicily invasion made it relevant. Cholmondeley had to obtain Glyndŵr Michael's body from the coroner. This meant visiting the morgue, viewing bodies, selecting one suitable for the operation. It was macabre work that haunted him. In a 1970s interview, Cholmondeley reflected, "I selected a corpse the way you might select produce at a market. Too old, too young, wrong build. This one will do. I had nightmares about it for years, but it was necessary. The operation saved thousands of lives. I had to focus on that, and not on the man whose body I was using." The submarine commander, Lieutenant Norman Jewell, faced his own psychological challenges. He commanded the HMS Seraph, which released the body. He watched as the corpse floated away toward the Spanish coast. Jewell later described the experience. "We stood on the deck in the pre-dawn darkness, watching a body in a life jacket drift toward shore. My crew thought we were deploying a secret weapon. I knew we were committing what would be grave desecration in normal circumstances. But war isn't normal. I told myself that every German soldier defending Greece instead of Sicily meant Allied soldiers who would survive. I had to believe that justified what we were doing. After the war, Joule attended a memorial service for Glyndwr Michael. Michael was eventually identified and received a proper gravestone in Spain. Joule stood at the grave and saluted. "I felt I owed him that," Joule said. "He saved lives without knowing it. He was a hero who never chose to be one." The Spanish fisherman who discovered the body was named José Antonio Rey Maria. He pulled the corpse ashore and notified local authorities. He never knew the body was part of an elaborate deception. Years later, when the operation was declassified, journalists found Rey Maria. He was shocked to learn the truth. "I thought I had found a poor British officer who died in the war," he said. "I never imagined it was a trick. I prayed for his soul. I suppose my prayers went to the wrong name, but I hope they counted anyway." The German intelligence officers who analysed the documents never knew they had been fooled. They spent hours examining every detail. They had the paper tested. They verified signatures. They checked that the units and commanders mentioned actually existed. Everything checked out. The documents appeared genuine. One German intelligence officer, Karl Erich Kuhlenthal, staked his career on the document's authenticity. He reported to Berlin that he had obtained crucial intelligence through Spanish sources. He was convinced he had achieved a major intelligence coup. After the war, when the truth was revealed, Kuhlenthal refused to believe it. He insisted the documents had been genuine. He claimed Allied statements about deception were themselves deception. He died in 1975, still believing he had been right. The psychological investment in being correct was too strong to overcome, even with definitive evidence. The human cost of deception operations was primarily psychological. The people who created these operations had to live with moral ambiguity. They used a dead man's body without permission. They fabricated identities and relationships. They manipulated enemies into making fatal strategic mistakes, all in service of saving Allied lives. But the methods troubled those who employed them. Montagu's post-war writings show someone wrestling with these ethical questions. Was it right to use Michael's body? Was it right to deceive people even if they were enemies? Did the ends justify the means? His conclusion? Yes, in war they did. But he never lost sight of the costs. Strategic impact, how one corpse changed a campaign operation. Mincemeat's success can be measured precisely through German force deployments. Before the deception, German forces in the Mediterranean were concentrated for Sicily's defence. After the deception, they were dispersed across multiple locations. The documents from Major Martin's briefcase reached German intelligence within days. Spanish officials photographed them and returned the originals to British authorities. The photographs were forwarded to German agents in Madrid. From Madrid, they went to Berlin. German intelligence subjected the documents to intensive analysis. They verified paper quality, ink composition, and signature authenticity. They checked that the people mentioned in the letters existed and held the positions indicated. They confirmed that the strategic considerations discussed were plausible. Everything checked out. On May 9, 1943, Admiral Canaris briefed Hitler personally on the intelligence. The briefing included the captured documents and analysis. Canaris reported that the documents appeared genuine. Allied invasion plans targeted Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. Hitler was convinced. He ordered immediate reinforcement of Greece and Sardinia. German forces were redeployed from Sicily and other locations. Specific changes included: the 1st Panzer Division was moved from France to Greece. Coastal defences in Greece were significantly strengthened. Luftwaffe squadrons were redeployed to Greek airfields. Naval forces were concentrated to protect Greek approaches. Sardinia received additional garrison troops and coastal batteries. The 90th Panzer Grenadier Division was diverted to Greece. Artillery units were redeployed from Sicily to Sardinian defences. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights over Greece and Sardinia increased dramatically. These weren't minor adjustments. They represented major strategic redeployment of Germany's limited Mediterranean forces. The numbers tell the story clearly. Before Operation Mincemeat, Sicily had approximately 230,000 Axis troops, German and Italian combined. After the deception, this was reduced to approximately 200,000. The missing 30,000 troops were redeployed to Greece, Sardinia, and other locations. More critically, the quality of forces changed. Mobile panzer divisions capable of rapid response were moved away from Sicily. They were replaced by static Italian coastal defence units of lower quality. This meant Allied forces would face weaker opposition during the critical first days of invasion. German naval dispositions also changed significantly. E-boats, fast attack craft, were moved from Sicilian bases to Greek waters. Submarines that had been patrolling near Sicily were redeployed. Mine-laying operations focused on approaches to Greece rather than Sicily. Luftwaffe deployments shifted dramatically. Fighter squadrons were moved from Sicilian airfields to Greece. Reconnaissance flights over Sicily decreased, while flights over Greece increased. Bomber units that should have attacked Allied invasion shipping were positioned incorrectly. The ultra-intelligence intercepts documented these changes in real time. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park read German messages discussing the redeployments. They saw explicit references to intelligence from Spain indicating Allied intentions. They watched as German forces moved exactly as Operation Mincemeat intended. One intercepted message from the German High Command to Field Marshal Kesselring stated, "Recent intelligence indicates Allied invasion of Greece and Sardinia, likely within 6 weeks. Sicily appears to be feint operation to draw our forces from true objectives. Strengthen defences in Greece immediately. Reduce Sicily garrison to minimum necessary to maintain credible defence." British intelligence couldn't have asked for better confirmation. The deception had worked at the highest levels. Hitler himself had been fooled. Sicily's defences were not completely abandoned. Germany still maintained forces there, but they were weaker than they would have been without the deception. The Sicily invasion began on July 10, 1943. Allied forces landed at multiple points on the southern coast. They faced opposition, but it was lighter than expected. Casualty comparisons tell the story. Allied planners had estimated 10,000 casualties in the first week of invasion. Actual casualties were approximately 7,500, 25% below estimates. This represents 2,500 fewer casualties than expected. Not all of this difference can be attributed to Operation Mincemeat. Other factors included effective preliminary bombing and naval superiority. But German intelligence assessments after the war confirmed that force dispositions were influenced by the deception. German generals interviewed after the war acknowledged the impact. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, commander of German forces in the Mediterranean, stated, "We expected the Allies to attack Greece and Sardinia based on intelligence from Spain. When Sicily was invaded, we were caught with forces deployed incorrectly. We attempted to redeploy, but the speed of the Allied advance made this ineffective." The operation had a second-order effect that was equally important. It validated Allied deception methods. German intelligence had believed a sophisticated, well-executed deception. This encouraged Allies to employ deception on an even larger scale. Operation Fortitude, the massive deception campaign for D-Day, built directly on Mincemeat's success. The same principles were applied on a vastly larger scale. Phantom armies, false radio traffic, and fabricated invasion plans convinced Germany that Normandy was a feint and Pas-de-Calais was the real target. The D-Day deception kept German forces tied down in the wrong location for weeks. The 15th Army sat at Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion that never came. Meanwhile, Allied forces consolidated their Normandy beachhead. Operation Fortitude's success trace its lineage directly to Operation Mincemeat. Both used the same fundamental insight. Germany desperately wanted intelligence and would believe well-crafted deception. The strategic impact extended beyond individual operations. Allied deception created a climate of uncertainty for German commanders. They could never be confident about Allied intentions. Every intelligence report might be deception. Every apparent Allied mistake might be deliberate misdirection. This uncertainty paralyzed German strategic decision-making. Resources were hedged across multiple potential threats. Reserves were held back rather than committed. Defensive preparations were dispersed rather than concentrated. Hitler's increasing paranoia was fed by successful Allied deceptions. He trusted his intuition less and less, but he also trusted his intelligence services less and less. This created decision paralysis at the highest levels. The cumulative effect of deception operations was substantial. Historians estimate that deception operations may have shortened the war by 6 to 12 months. This represents hundreds of thousands of lives saved. One corpse, carrying false documents, influenced strategic decisions that affected millions. Modern relevance: deception in the information age operation. Mincemeat's techniques remain relevant in modern intelligence operations. The fundamental principles of deception haven't changed. Technology has changed, but human psychology remains constant. Modern deception operations use cyber tools rather than corpses. But the core strategy is identical. Make the adversary believe false information by making it appear accidentally obtained. Include verifiable true information to establish credibility. Ensure consistency across multiple information sources. Exploit confirmation bias. People believe what they expect to believe. The 2016 US election interference operations used these exact principles. False information was planted across multiple platforms. It included enough truth to seem credible. It reinforced existing beliefs and biases. It appeared to come from independent sources that were actually coordinated. Social media has made deception easier in some ways, harder in others. Easier because false information can be spread rapidly and widely. Harder because verification is easier and errors are quickly exposed. The challenge remains the same: creating deception sophisticated enough to fool skeptical analysts. Modern militaries employ deception extensively. Electronic warfare creates false radar signatures. Cyber operations plant false information in enemy networks. Decoy systems simulate real military units. Information operations spread false narratives. Russia's Maskirovka doctrine explicitly incorporates deception. China's unrestricted warfare includes information deception. Western militaries have formally established deception commands. The ethical questions that troubled Montagu remain relevant. Is it acceptable to deceive even in war? Where are the lines between legitimate deception and immoral manipulation? Do the ends justify the means? These questions have no easy answers, but W22's deception operations provide case studies for examining them. Operation Mincemeat succeeded because it exploited fundamental aspects of human psychology. Confirmation bias. Germans wanted to believe Sicily was a feint. Authority bias. Documents appeared to come from senior Allied commanders. Consistency effect. Multiple sources confirmed the same story. Accident excuse: the intelligence appeared accidentally obtained, not deliberately planted. These psychological vulnerabilities still exist. Modern deception operations exploit the same cognitive biases. Sophistication of technology has changed. Human psychology has not. The lesson for intelligence professionals: assume deception is possible. Never fully trust single-source intelligence. Look for inconsistencies that might indicate deception. Question information that confirms expectations too neatly. The lesson for everyone: information warfare is real. Not all information you receive is true. Some false information is deliberately crafted by sophisticated actors. Critical thinking and verification are essential. WA2 deception operations also demonstrate the importance of secrecy and time. Operation Mincemeat worked because Germany didn't know it had been deceived until after the war. If they had discovered the deception immediately, they would have correctly reinforced Sicily. Modern deception operations face similar requirements. The deception must remain secret until it no longer matters. Once exposed, the technique becomes less effective because adversaries guard against it. This creates tension between historical transparency and operational security. Declassifying deception operations teaches valuable lessons, but it also reveals techniques that adversaries can counter. The 50-year delay before Operation Mincemeat was fully declassified reflected this balance. By the 1990s, the specific techniques were obsolete enough that revelation was safe, but the fundamental principles remained classified longer. The modern proliferation of information makes deception both easier and harder. Easier because more channels exist for planting false information. Harder because more sources exist for verification. The victor in modern information warfare is often whoever controls the verification systems. This is why attacks on media credibility and fact-checking systems are strategic. If verification systems are discredited, false information becomes more believable. Operation Mincemeat succeeded in an era of limited information. There was no internet for verifying claims. Intelligence agencies had limited ability to cross-check information. This made sophisticated deception more likely to succeed. Modern deception must account for extensive information availability, but it can also exploit information overload and fragmentation. When people are overwhelmed with information, they often rely on cognitive shortcuts. These shortcuts are vulnerable to exploitation. The enduring lesson: deception works when it tells people what they want to believe. Germany wanted to believe Sicily was a feint because defending it would be difficult. Modern targets want to believe narratives that confirm their worldview. Sophisticated deception leverages these desires. Conclusion: the corpse that won a campaign operation. Mincemeat was a masterpiece of deception. Every detail was carefully crafted. Every potential question was anticipated. Every element reinforced the false narrative. A corpse became a British officer. A vagrant became a hero. False documents became strategic intelligence. Deception became a decisive weapon. The Nazis protected Greece and Sardinia. Allied forces invaded Sicily against weakened defences. Thousands of lives were saved. The Italian campaign succeeded, all because a dead man carried convincing lies. Glyndwr Michael died alone, desperate and forgotten. His death seemed meaningless, but his body served a purpose he never chose and never knew about. Was it right to use him this way? Montagu struggled with this question for decades. His conclusion: the lives saved justified the method, but he never fully reconciled the ethics. The people who created Operation Mincemeat carried psychological burdens. They had deceived, manipulated, and used a corpse for strategic advantage. They had blurred the lines between truth and fiction. They had exploited human psychology to deadly effect. But they had also saved lives. Allied soldiers who would have died in the Sicily invasion survived. The war was shortened. Victory came sooner. The ends justified the means. Barely, uncomfortably, but definitively. The German intelligence officers who analyzed the documents never fully accepted they had been fooled. The psychological investment in being right was too strong. Some died still believing the documents were genuine. This reveals a deeper truth about deception. Well-crafted lies are often believed even after being definitively disproven. People will defend false beliefs rather than admit they were deceived. Modern information warfare exploits this psychological vulnerability. Create deception sophisticated enough, and some targets will never accept the truth even when shown definitive evidence. Operation Mincemeat demonstrated that deception could be a decisive weapon, not just tactical deception on the battlefield, but strategic deception that influenced high-level decision-making. This lesson was applied at ever larger scales. D-Day deception kept entire German armies defending the wrong coast. Post-war intelligence operations used deception systematically. Modern warfare incorporates deception as standard practice. The spy who tricked the Nazis wasn't a spy at all. He was a corpse, a dead vagrant, transformed into a British officer, carrying false documents that seemed genuine, telling convincing lies to paranoid analysts, and they believed. Hitler moved his defences to protect the wrong places. Allied forces invaded against weakened opposition. The corpse that couldn't speak had delivered the most important message of the campaign. Operation Mincemeat proved that in war, the greatest victories sometimes come from the most audacious deceptions, that a well-crafted lie can be more powerful than a poorly aimed truth, that appearance and reality are not the same thing, and that sometimes the most effective spy is one who never lived at all. The Nazis protected Greece and Sardinia, while Allied forces took Sicily, all because they believed a dead man's briefcase. The spy who tricked the Nazis into protecting the wrong city wasn't a hero in any traditional sense. He was a victim of circumstance, transformed into a weapon. Used without consent for purposes beyond his knowing, but his inadvertent service saved thousands and changed the course of the war. Glyndwr Michael is buried in Spain. His gravestone, erected decades later, reads, "Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, R.M., a vagrant who died alone and desperate, remembered as an officer who never existed, who carried out a mission he never knew about, who helped win a war he never fought in. The ultimate deception. Even the grave tells lies, but lies that honor the truth of his contribution. Operation Mincemeat. The corpse that fooled an empire. The spy who wasn't a spy. The deception that saved thousands. They protected the wrong city because a dead man told them to, and they believed him.